Awesome, thanks. And would you mind passing me the hosting privilege so I can share my screen? Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, and I'm glad you all are here. We're going to talk about ESG CV dollars as it pertains to emergency shelter projects, which most of you at your agencies were funded for. And I understand that different agencies plan to use these dollars differently, but we did want to talk about what the expectations are in HMIS for data collection and data entry. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So, and I do apologize because some of this material has been said in the other project types, but because this will be available as a resource for new staff and for reference moving forward, I wanted to make sure each training session had all of the same material available. So as you know, we have a whole bunch of ESG funding coming our way in Nashville as a response to the coronavirus to help in our efforts to house people experiencing homelessness. The 4 different project types that were funded in Nashville are rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, street outreach, and emergency shelter projects. So you should have noticed that you will now have some new enter data as modes available to you when you log into HMIS. Rachel has been working very hard to make sure that all of the projects are set up now. So you should see those. If though for some reason you are not seeing the project types that you believe that you should, please let us know so that we can make sure to grant everyone access to the EDA modes that they'll need. Data collection is live. We are currently in the first quarter of reporting. So you can technically be entering data into your project types. As soon as you start providing those services, you should start entering that data. So lucky for us, I feel that emergency shelter projects, it's pretty straightforward. Definitely feel free, though, throughout the training to pause me and ask any questions that you have, especially because this is a small group. This can be a little bit more informal. So what is an emergency shelter project? It's a project that offers temporary shelter or lodging for people experiencing homelessness. I've attached here a screenshot from the RFA that lists the different categories that are eligible for emergency shelter assistance, which, as you can see, is 1 through 4. So pretty broad eligibility. I debated whether or not to include this, but I wanted to go ahead and clarify the different types of project setups for shelter projects in HMIS. And the reason that I decided to include it is because the HUD Data Standards Manual talks about these different project types differently. And so I wanted you to understand what your project is set up for so you know what the requirements are for data entry moving forward. So there are 2 types of shelter projects. And again, this is really just like an HMIS administrative thing. We have entry-exit types, which this will be similar to any other project types you're entering for. So a rapid rehousing project is an entry-exit type. So you're entering information at the project start date, and you're making sure it's up to date as well when you exit clients from the project. So this is really what HUD is encouraging all shelter projects to be, because it really it creates high data quality. So this is going to require that when a client enters the shelter project, you have a full record in that project entry, as well as when they're exited. Versus what they call a night shelter, and this would be something more like the mission. So they're operating at like a super high volume of people, and they are entering at irregular time periods. So it would be much more tricky and / impossible to collect that sort of entry-exit information. So again, all project types that were funded through ESG CV were set up as entry exits. So it's going to be important that when you're referring back to the manual, you're looking at that piece of information. Any questions about that so far? Okay, well, I'm going to pass it to Rachel to talk a bit about what you might have seen when you submitted your project setup forms. Yes, all right. So this is one of these kind of administrative pieces that is super, super important on the back end. It's what allows us to report on these projects properly and submit them in the format that they need to be in for HUD to understand them. So you all are going to be hearing from me soon with some clarifying pieces about what we call bed and unit inventory. Basically, all this is we need to attach to this project the total inventory of what number of beds are available so that we can look at things like utilization rate on any given day or any given time, the total number of bed nights that are available and utilized, for example. Specifically, we look at the total number of beds available in your project per night, if any of those are seasonal beds, if any of those beds are dedicated to specific populations like veterans or people experiencing chronic homelessness or youth, a number of things. The date that inventory begins and ends, for instance, if it changes over time. So this is something that we really manage on our end, but we depend on our participating agencies to update us on this information if it changes. So this is like I will reach out to our HMIS points of contact soon to confirm this information, and then part of the role of the agency point of contact is to help us stay on top of any changes to this information throughout the year. So there are just a couple of questions that I'll send to you by email. Cool. Any questions about bed and unit inventory before we move on? We are just cruising right along. Like I said, this is a bit more straightforward than some of the other project types, which is great. So let's talk about project start date and how to update the record while the client is enrolled in your project. The project start date for this project type is going to be the first night that the client stayed in the shelter. I do know that many agencies that were funded for this project type are planning to use this in more of a hotel or motel voucher sort of capacity. And so in that case, that's going to be the first night that you paid for the hotel or motel is when the client should be entered into the project. Any questions about that?
Shanley, for CCF, I'm trying to figure out the start date for rapid rehousing with the hotel voucher program. So would the rapid rehousing start date be the same start date as the voucher program?
That's a good question. Okay, I'm going to answer based on what I think you just asked, but let me know if I'm off course. So, and I do know, and this is like so unique and creative how we're utilizing the resources we have in Nashville. If a client is in theory going to be using shelter dollars in a motel, and then they are referred to the rapid rehousing project and will be signing a lease in the same hotel space, the dates should still reflect when that actual transition occurred. So if the client, for example, is put into a hotel and they're going to be there the entire month of January, but as of February 1st, they're going to be signing a lease in the same space, the shelter project should be open the entire month of January, closed out the last night that the shelter project was paying, and then the rapid rehousing move-in date would be the first day that the lease started. Did that answer the question? I know there's a lot of creative hotel stuff happening.
Yeah, that made sense. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. And that's a really good question because I think that that's going to be happening a good bit. So fantastic. Okay, so if while your client is in your shelter project, there are any updates or changes that occur, it will be important that you add those in the client's record by adding interim updates. I think that there's a couple of you who are actually scheduled for a new user training with me later this afternoon, and major kudos to you if you're learning all of this backwards right now. That will make more sense after this afternoon. If in the rare instance your client is in the shelter project for more than a year, I really highly doubt that this is going to be a common occurrence, but it is required that an annual assessment be completed through an interim annual assessment, just making sure to update any changes that have occurred. And again, I can't imagine that's going to be a very common scenario, especially due to the fact that most of you all will be using for hotel motel voucher assistance. So at project start, these are the list of required data elements that will need to be entered into HMIS. You can see there's the two different categories for types of shelters, and you'll want to reference the entry-exit list. And again, so the reason that project setup is so critical is because we're trying to make this very automatic. We're trying to make sure that as long as you're entering all of the questions in the workflow, that you're also fulfilling all of the requirements of each project type. You can see also coordinated entry is one of the required pieces of the shelter project. So the client should already, or in your services, be entered into the coordinated entry process. And that'll be really important too, because that's how they're going to gain access to any rapid rehousing resources or any other permanent supportive housing as well.
I did have a very basic question, which you might be going to go over. It might be so obvious you're not even going to talk about it, but so all of our folks are going to be in coordinated entry, mostly put by Oasis Center. So how does this interact with that? Can I, like, will all the people who are already in CE, all of those 4.02, 4.03, will that already be in there if it's been entered in CE? And I assume they are just sharing the same data pool. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, great question. That is not so obvious. I think that's a fantastic question. Especially in the way that you will primarily be interacting with your clients. If they're already in coordinated entry, then these will auto-populate into your workflow when you enter them into the street outreach project. And at the end of, what's that? I'm sorry, I just did the street outreach project training emergency shelter. When you enter them into your shelter project, this will auto-populate from the most recent record that had been added. So your job will be essentially just to make sure nothing had changed. And at the end of the content, I'll pull up HMIS and we'll look at what that really means. Great question. So exits from the shelter project. So each client that's entered will eventually need a project exit date. The exit date should reflect the last night that the client stayed in the shelter project. And again, so we have some creative sort of hotel things happening. We talked about the rapid rehousing scenario that could come up where a client moves directly. Well, they may not move, but in theory, they're now signing a lease in the project or in the hotel they were in a shelter for before. Does that make sense? I just said it in a wild way. Okay, in any other scenarios though, the last date that your shelter project is paying will be also the same date that the client is exited from the project. So it's important to remember too, this might take some collaborating with other participating agencies. that a client should not be enrolled in a shelter project at the same time that they have a housing move-in date listed in the system, because that doesn't make sense. So it doesn't make sense that they would be still experiencing literal homelessness if they have a move-in date. So again, that might mean just communicating closely with agencies that are engaging your clients in a rapid rehousing capacity. And then making sure, backdate mode is your friend. If that doesn't happen in real time, you can always backdate to the correct date and make adjustments in the system that way. Any questions about exit? And then in conjunction with the exit will be the destination. So when a client is exited from the project, you're going to select the most accurate destination possible. Ideally, and especially if you're working with clients in the hotel, motel voucher capacity, then you're going to have a pretty clear idea about where that client is exiting to. And so make sure that you're just selecting the most appropriate and accurate option available. Okay, I'm going to hop on over to HMIS so we can see what it looks like. Okay. I'm going to shadow Courtney as I always do. You can't see it? Okay, one sec. Let me try again. Can you see it now? Okay, everyone can see HMIS. Awesome. So I'm going to shadow Courtney from Nashville Cares. They're receiving emergency shelter dollars. And so let's say we've decided it makes sense to use these hotel vouchers to house a client that we just met. So we're going to make sure always to select the correct EDA mode. If you have questions about what these different EDA modes are or what they mean, please reach out to us. Rachel mentioned this in one of the other trainings too, but this is sort of like an arbitrary naming convention that we use to help keep us organized. But if you call your projects a specific name, we're happy to name them that in the system too. So reach out to us if you'd like us to update that. So Nashville Cares, Emergency Shelter, ESG CV is the one that we're going to enter into. So you can see that here is now in the EDA mode, which is great. You guessed it, we're working with Shanley. All right, let's say we met with her today and we're actually going to put her in the hotel tonight. So we're going to keep today as our, actually, let's do it yesterday so that when I exit them, there's a day between. So yesterday we met with them. In most scenarios, I'd imagine you're not just housing folks for one night, but that's what this example will look like. So we can see here that they have a release on file, which is fantastic. This is going to be something that you want to get into the habit of verifying that they have this universal release on file. If they don't, it's going to be important that you get one and enter it into HMIS. So it looks like Shanley has an open CE entry, which is great because she still is experiencing literal homelessness. We don't need to do anything with this for now, but we are going to add our shelter entry. This is a HUD type. So for you, the assessment will be attached to a HUD type. So that's going to be the answer for you there. Okay. So this is where I get to show you how just easy peasy this is. Because Shanley was already in the coordinated entry process in HMIS, you can see that all of this information has pulled over from the most up-to-date assessment that was added in HMIS. And what you're going to want to do is just verify that everything is complete. Okay, look, there was missing income. That's great. She has 0 income. We want to make sure that it says that she has 0 income there. Looks like everything else is filled in and complete. So you can see here that this question is for street outreach and night-by-night shelters, which again, we said is not what your shelter type was set up as. So you don't need to worry about this question here or this question here. So literally you're just saving and exiting. And that's going to enter, not only enter them into your project, it's also going to satisfy all of the data requirements that were listed in the chart I showed you earlier. As long as you're putting the new timestamp attached to your project type, then you have done what you need to do. Any questions about that so far? Okay, then let's say, for example, this client is going to be moving into a rapid rehousing unit. What we are going to want to do is exit the client. As I scroll, completed program makes sense?
Yeah.
The reason for leaving isn't as important as the destination. The destination is really what we look at exit.
Yeah, so make sure to just select the most appropriate. I'd say if they're moving into a housing project, then they would have completed the program. And then we'll say that there's going to be a rental by client with the rapid rehousing or equivalent subsidy or whatever is most appropriate. You can see there's a pretty extensive list available. You do want to avoid these answers down here as often as possible. If you can get an accurate destination, that is great. But again, let's just say the rapid rehousing subsidy.
I want to point out too on that list, not to get confused because down in the temporary situations, there's like, or maybe in the, yeah, like the hotel motel. If your hotel motel project is being considered rapid rehousing permanent housing, then you should choose the rental with rapid rehousing subsidy. Does that make sense?
Okay, if there are no questions about that, we'll save and continue. So now what's going to happen is that this is going to be the exit information attached to your exit. You just want to make sure that nothing has changed since the client was entered. If anything had changed, you would update it here. If there was a move-in date and that's the reason that the client was moving, so in this example they are, you want to make sure to update that here. And that is sort of the full life cycle of the shelter project in HMIS. So coordinated entry too, if you know that they're moving into a housing project, even if you weren't the person that opened them in CE, it would be awesome if you would go ahead and close out that coordinated entry assessment as well, just to close out and make their record as accurate and up-to-date as possible. Another feature that I'm just
excuse me, I have a question. I guess I'm a little confused about closing it out, specifically what that means. And let me tell you why. See, I would have thought that if we had gone from our emergency shelter program into the rapid rehousing program, which would be longer term, the next thing we would do was immediately open that rapid rehousing project. So tell me what we're closing and where am I confused?
Yes, no, you are 100% correct. So in this example, if Salvation Army, for example, was going to be working with the client in a rapid rehousing manner moving forward, then they would absolutely be opening a rapid rehousing project. In theory, though, they probably would already be open in rapid rehousing because most of the time there's some sort of housing search that's happening while they're already enrolled in the project. So in this example, and maybe I should have just done that so you all could have seen, and I'm sorry about that. In this example, if the client was being entered into a rapid rehousing project, that would also be entered here either before or now. Is that helpful? I'm sorry I didn't talk about that because I know many of you have also received rapid rehousing dollars, and so that will be the case that they might be enrolled in the shelter project and the rapid rehousing project until housing is located.
And that would be an instance of there would be multiple projects listed here on the entry exit tab at once. And if you needed to toggle back and forth between the projects, if someone was at your agency's emergency shelter and they are in your agency's rapid rehousing project, but they haven't yet moved into, they don't yet have a housing move-in date, then you would change the enter data as mode and go into that rapid rehousing provider to create that rapid rehousing entry or add their moving in date, for example. So the coordinated entry piece of all that, what we were saying of closing that out. So coordinated entry runs in the foreground in conjunction with all of these other project types, the full length that someone is experiencing a housing crisis. So as far as closing out the coordinated entry would be only when that person is permanently housed. So if they are like working with a rapid rehousing program, but they haven't yet had that housing move-in date, then they would not yet be exited from coordinated entry as permanently housed.
David, does that feel more clear? I definitely was looking at this as more of like from the shelter project type, but I know in real life, many of you are also being funded for rapid rehousing. So knowing how those interact is definitely very important.
All right. So when they're permanently housed, being in the emergency shelter program is not permanently housed. And so the coordinated entry would not be exited while they're in temporary emergency shelter.
That's correct, unless the hotel is being used in a permanent housing capacity. So if a lease is being signed and there's a shift in how that hotel is being looked at, then at that point, you would close the CE and shelter project types. But if it's just being used in a temporary transitional way to get the client to a more permanent housing situation, then they would continue to be enrolled in the shelter project.
Gotcha.
Great questions. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions?
I'll say too, one other thing to remember, if someone leaves your program unexpectedly or for whatever reason, they are no longer a part of your program and you exit them for that reason, if to your knowledge they are still experiencing a housing crisis, then you would not also exit them from coordinated entry. We run into that a lot. Someone will say, oh, they're no longer in our program because they broke the rules or they didn't want to be in it anymore, and so they also exit them from CE, but they're still living in a placement member habitation or another emergency shelter. That should not be the case. So if you're closing someone out of your project, always kind of take a beat to think, are they still, to my knowledge, still experiencing a housing crisis? If they are, then they won't be exited from CE.
Awesome. So I'm going to hop back to my PowerPoint. Alrighty. I want to talk about some common data quality errors so that you can hopefully avoid these in your data entry. I pointed at them once when we were in HMIS, but this top line is a list of answers that technically count as data quality errors in HMIS. So anytime you list client refused, client doesn't know if it's left blank, other, or data not collected, that's technically going to count as a data quality error. HUD does recognize that in some instances the client will refuse to answer the question, and that is just fine and should be the answer that's listed in that case. However, you just want to get into the habit of collecting as much data as you can and the client's comfortable with so that you can avoid as many data quality errors as possible. Backdate mode and EDA modes not being set correctly account for the majority, I'd say, of data quality errors that we come across. So if you have any confusion at all about how to properly use the backdate mode or which EDA mode you want to be selecting, please let us know so we can help you clarify. That's going to save you a ton of time come reporting in correcting any errors. I have a picture here of the data quality question. So you can see there's the name question, but then the name data quality question. This is particularly important if you were to write the client's name but leave the data quality question blank. That client will pull into your report as an error with the name. So it's important that you just make sure to spot check for that. Whenever you're working with a household, so not just an individual, but someone with multiple household members, another thing that we see on a fairly regular basis is that a client is left out of the data entry. And the way you can avoid that is always making sure, like in this photo here, to select all of the household members that are relevant for the services that you're providing. It's also important too, when you're working with households, that if you add additional household members, that you go back and actually fill in their record in HMIS according to what is required. And that's where you can really pay attention to the red section headers that'll tell you what information needs to be added for which household members. And then some other ones, relationship to head of household is left blank fairly regularly, so make sure you fill in that question. Annual assessments not being completed when necessary, and then that client location question, which is in Davidson County, going to be TN 504, which we've made a note of in the workflow to hopefully help you out with that. Any questions about any of those common data quality errors? Alrighty. Well, then the last thing I wanted to talk about is data quality and reporting. As everyone knows, there's going to be just a lot of focus on the outcomes of these projects and the data quality that's in HMIS. So I want to make sure that people understand how to run their caper. This is going to be mostly important for those of you in this space that are the point of contacts or that will be responsible for the quality of data that's entered. I've hosted a couple reporting trainings where I show you how to run the caper, which is the name of the report that is used to run ESG data quality. But if you'd like to attend the next reporting training, please reach out to me and let me know so that we can make sure that you know how to monitor your data quality. Rachel and I are going to start having some HMIS office hours, and those will be open to anyone for sort of whatever you need them to be, especially though around the reporting periods and when it's your opportunity to make sure your data quality is pristine. We will make sure that we have time available to you to reflect on and review your capers and spot check for any potential trouble spots. So this is just sort of for your reference, the reporting periods for the ESG CV dollars. This left side is the one that you want to pay attention to. So as you can see, we are currently in quarter one, which will end December 31st. And then I'm going to skip to this. Well, this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry. What this all means and boils down to is that the week-ish after the quarter ends is when you will be responsible to make sure your caper is pulling with high data quality. After that, it's going to be out of your hands. It's getting turned over to our team as well as MDHA to actually report that information out to HUD. So we're going to be super sure to make sure that you know when all of these time periods are, and that if you have any questions, that you feel supported in having your data quality reflect your hard work. That's the end, guys. That felt way too easy, actually. Are there any questions? Yeah. 1 second. Rachel wants to. Dantri, would you be able to pass the presenter function to Rachel Cook? Or am I able to? Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Hey again, everyone. I wanted to show you a quick resource that you all have access to that I have set up for you as a nice little gift. So there is a function in HMIS called Report Writer that we're able to cobble together some simple reports about folks who are active in your projects. So I wanted to show you a quick report that I've set up for you guys. If you go to Enter Data As and select your ESG CV funded project, over here on this left-hand side, and I have some screenshots of this that I will email out after, so don't panic. If you click Reports, so here's where your caper is, and then down at the bottom under Custom Reports, this button called Report Writer. Some agencies who have had projects in HMIS that have been around for a while might have a longer list of available reports for, but most of you will have at least just this one that shows active clients. All you have to do to review this report is to click the magnifying glass. No active clients yet in this project, but it will show the client ID, first name, last name, entry date, exit date, and the user at your agency that created the entry. It's filtered to show folks with an entry date but no exit date. In other words, those who are currently open at your agency, just to keep tabs on things. You can also download it to Excel. And if you take a look at that and see other come up with other elements that it would be helpful to see, know that we're available to help produce some of those things that might not be available in the caper. So we are going to be, like Shanley said, spending a lot of time helping you all monitor these closely and stay on top of them. So we are here and available for that. So I'll send that instructions for the report writer out, and then I will send my couple of questions about the bed and unit inventory out, and I will look forward to hearing back from everybody.
Cool. Any last questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you all so much for being here and all the hard work that you're doing at your agencies. I know so many of you here are taking in a lot of information all at the same time. So just want to affirm all that you're feeling and that you're doing. Yeah, so as soon as I have this recording from Dantri, I will post it to the Weebly. You can check out the ESG CV tab now for the rapid rehousing and the street outreach project type trainings and resource material. So thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.